In Adderley v. Florida, the United States Supreme Court considered whether a state's trespassing statute could be used to convict peaceful civil rights protesters demonstrating outside a jailhouse without violating the First and 14th Amendments of the United States Constitution. Harriett Adderley and fellow students at Florida A&M University were protesting the arrests of other Florida A&M students who had been demonstrating for the integration of public theaters the day before. Adderley and the other protesters had congregated outside a jail entrance and driveway not generally used by the public. Rather, the sheriff and deputies transporting prisoners and tradesmen servicing the jail used the entrance. The county sheriff warned the protesters in the crowd that officers would arrest them if they didn't disperse in 10 minutes. Some students left, but Adderley and others remained and were arrested. A county court jury convicted Adderley and her fellow defendants of trespass on jail premises with malicious and mischievous intent. The Florida Circuit Court and District Court of Appeal affirmed the convictions. The United States Supreme Court granted cert to determine whether the trespass convictions denied students their rights of free speech, assembly, petition, due process of law, and equal protection as guaranteed under the 14th Amendment. Justice Black, writing for a 5-justice majority, upheld the convictions. Like a private landowner, a state generally may, quote, control the use of its own property for its own lawful non-discriminatory purpose, unquote. Thus, a state government may constitutionally restrict protests outside jails. Although public spaces like state capitals may be open to the public, jails, which are built for security purposes, usually aren't. Here, nothing in the Constitution prevented Florida from even-handedly enforcing its laws against people trespassing upon jail property. There was no evidence that the sheriff arrested the students because he disagreed with what the protesters were saying. Rather, the sheriff objected to the protesters' trespass on land reserved for the jail. Justice Douglas, joined by 3 justices, dissented. Douglas argued that state trespass law can't be used to punish the exercise of First Amendment rights on publicly owned property unless the expressive activity devolves into violence or otherwise significantly interferes with the facility's purpose or business. To Douglas, the jailhouse, like a courthouse or statehouse, is a seat of government where citizens have an ancient right to petition for the redress of grievances. The First Amendment doesn't permit this ancient right to be suppressed by trespass charges. In this case, the jailhouse grounds weren't marked with no trespassing signs, and Florida didn't claim that the public was generally excluded from the grounds. In the past, the Supreme Court had limited the application of state laws that inhibited the right to protest peacefully on public grounds. There may be some public spaces so clearly devoted to other purposes that the spaces shouldn't be used to air grievances. But not all public spaces are off limits to peaceful protest. And the custodians of those spaces, like the county sheriff, shouldn't have the power to decide when and under what circumstances public spaces may be used for peaceful protest. Douglas also argued that a state will always be able to devise a non-discriminatory justification for its actions. However, by prohibiting orderly protests against injustice, the majority's ruling only furthered the injustices at the root of the student demonstrations. Adderley represented a limited reversal of the broader free speech protections that had evolved in the post-World War II era. It remains an important precedent on the limits of First Amendment protections for expressive activity conducted on publicly owned property.